Alexandra considered herself a lucky person when it came to her parents. She was glad that her parents didn't quarrel like some of her friends' parents, nor did they have any major disagreements. In fact, she felt envious for her parents' true love for each other and hoped that one day she too could find a love like theirs. "Alex, are you ready?" Alexandra heard her mother's voice as she was doing her makeup. "Yes, Mom, I am ready," she replied from her room. Alexandra turned around and was stunned to see how gorgeous her mother looked. "Mom, you look amazing. My friends will go crazy after seeing you," Alexandra complimented her mother. Alice smiled and looked at her daughter. "You are exactly like your dad, always complimenting me at every chance you get," she replied. "Dad and I cannot help if you are this pretty," Alexandra teased her mother. A few minutes later, Alice and Alexandra descended the stairs to join the party. Sam had arranged his 18th wedding anniversary party and invited the entire family, colleagues, friends, and neighbors. He wanted to celebrate his special day with everyone. "I can't believe your parents are still in love with each other," Alexandra's friend Maggie said to her. Alexandra smiled at her and felt proud of her parents. "All my parents ever do is cheat on each other and ask me to stay quiet about it," Maggie said remorsefully. Alexandra felt sorry for her. She had never witnessed her parents screaming at each other or cheating on each other. "How did your parents meet, Alex?" one of her friends asked her. Alexandra smiled and started telling her favorite love story. "Mom and Dad went to college together. They were in the same class and fell for each other. The rest is history. Dad asked for Mom's hand in marriage from my grandpa, and he agreed." Alexandra's friends were in total awe of how her parents were loyal and respectful to each other. "Dad, it was an awesome party. My friends couldn't stop praising you and Mom," Alexandra exclaimed. Sam smiled at his 16-year-old daughter and replied, "I had a chance to celebrate the best day and the best decision of my life." He looked at Alice, who laughed. Alexandra went to her bedroom and thanked God for blessing her with the best parents. "Sam, I think we should go for a short trip this weekend," Alice suggested to her husband. "How about next weekend? I am busy this week," he politely replied to his wife. Alice smiled and nodded. A few hours later, Sam went to sleep. Alice looked at her husband and smiled. Sam's phone rang, and it showed 3 unread messages. Alice picked up her husband's phone and read the messages. The first message was from the bank that notified Sam about the money transfer to Lee Brown. Alice thought that it must be a business transaction, but when she read the second message, her entire world collapsed. The second message was from Lee, thanking Sam for sending a handsome amount to her account this month. Alice looked at Lee's display picture. She was a few years older than Alexandra and was quite attractive. She quickly read the previous messages from Lee Brown and learned that her beloved husband had been sending her money for the last 2 months. Alice was devastated. "Who is this girl?" she asked herself. She quickly kept Sam's phone on the table and opened her laptop. She logged onto her Instagram account and searched for Lee Brown. A second later, there was a list of accounts with Lee Brown, and Alice recognized her instantly. She opened her profile and was shocked to see Lee's picture and learn about her profession. Lee was a professional escort girl who went out with plenty of men for money. Alice shut her laptop and left the room. She went to the balcony and cried, as she felt deeply hurt by Sam. "My husband has been seeing an escort for the past 3 months, and then he confesses his love for me." Alice felt betrayed. The next morning when Sam woke up, he was surprised to see that Alice was not in the room. Alice used to wake up early and bring him a cup of strong coffee in bed. But today, Sam had overslept, and Alice didn't wake him up. He left the bed and quickly got ready to go to work. Alice was nowhere to be seen in the house. Only Alexandra was at the table for breakfast. "Alex, where is your mom?" Sam asked worriedly. Alexandra replied, "No clue, Dad. She prepared the breakfast table and left hurriedly. I asked her where she was going, and she said something urgent and she'll be back soon." Sam called Alice, but her phone was switched off. "That's strange. Alice has never left like this before," he thought. Sam took a few bites of his sandwich and then left the house. He dropped Alexandra to school and then drove to a nearby cafe. "I'll convince Lee to listen to me and give up this profession," Sam told himself. "I'll assure her that I'll take care of her every month and she doesn't have to worry about working." He continued driving while thinking of ways to convince Lee. When Sam entered the cafe, Lee was already there. Sam smiled at her and went to the last table. "How are you, Lee?" Sam asked and kissed Lee's forehead. "I am good," Lee replied. Sam nodded and gave her a file. "This file has the admission forms and prospectus of the city's best colleges. Select anyone where you'd like to study and I'll take care of everything. You no longer have to do this." Sam took Lee's hand and explained to her. "Yes, Lee, he is right. He will pay for your college and your lavish lifestyle. You don't have to go out with hundreds of men to make a fortune. Sam will be enough to cover it all." Sam and Lee were stunned to hear these words. When Sam turned around, he was shocked to see his wife, Alice, standing beside their table. "Alice, what are you doing here?" Sam got up from his chair and asked Alice. "Oh, nothing, Sam. I just read your conversation with Lee and learned that you transfer her a good chunk of money every month. I got curious to meet Lee, so I have followed you in an Uber since you left the house," Alice said angrily. "Ma'am, you are gravely mistaken. It's not what you think," Lee spoke. "Just shut up. I am not here to talk to you. I'm here to catch my husband red-handed, which I did," Alice screamed at Lee and marched out of the cafe. Sam was puzzled. He still couldn't believe his wife was here and saw her with Lee. He quickly drove back home to talk to Alice and explain everything. "Alice, please calm down, my dear. I'm not dating Lee. Please. I can never even imagine cheating on you." Sam begged Alice to open the bedroom door. "Alice, please just listen to me once, please." Sam knocked on the door, requesting his wife to come out. A few minutes later, Alice stepped out of the room. Her eyes looked red and swollen from all the crying. "Sam, why were you with an escort?" Alice asked sternly. "Alice, Lee is my daughter," Sam said to Alice. "What? Were you married before? Why didn't you ever tell me?" Alice asked. Sam closed his eyes briefly and replied, "Lee's mother and I hooked up once when I was drunk. Anita told me a few months later that she was pregnant with my child and wanted to abort it." Sam looked at Alice, who looked devastated. "She needed money, so I lent it to her, but she used the money on alcohol and drugs and didn't go for the abortion. A few months later, she informed me of Lee's birth. I was engaged to you then and didn't want to lose you, so my parents took care of Lee and sent her a monthly allowance," Sam explained. "What? Your parents knew about all this and kept me in the dark?" Alice yelled at Sam. Sam nodded. "Alice, it was a mistake. I didn't know what I was doing in that shady bar. All I know is that I was drunk and I slept with Anita. I knew nothing about her. It was all a mistake." Alice looked at her husband and asked, "Why is she back in your life? Where is her mother?" Sam sighed deeply. "Anita died from a drug overdose, and Lee was alone. The landlord kicked her out and she had nowhere to go or ask for money. She called my father, who sent her a small sum of money and instructed her to look for a job," Sam explained and paused for a moment. "But Lee had never been to college. She couldn't find a decent job, hence, she became an escort to survive. As soon as my father informed me about Lee, I had to do something for her. After all, she is my daughter. She came into this world because of her mother and my mistake," Sam said sadly. "Sam, I cannot believe you hid all this from me. I thought you loved me, and we shared everything." Alice started crying. Sam was upset seeing his wife crying. "Alice, please don't cry. I am just helping Lee to take a fresh start. That's all. Please understand my position." Sam tried reasoning with her. Alexandra felt miserable seeing her parents like this. She had overheard everything and felt sorry for both her mom and dad. Alice needed some time alone, so Sam decided to stay a few days at a hotel. The house felt incomplete and lonely without Sam and Alice's chatter and laughter. "Someone must have jinxed my parents' love," Alexandra thought as she wept and slept. The next morning at 11 a.m. the doorbell rang. Alice thought it would be Sam. She got up from her bed and went to open the door. She was shocked to see Lee standing at the door. "Hello, Alice," Lee said meekly. "May I come in, please?" she asked Alice, who nodded and allowed her to enter. "I am terribly sorry for coming into your life, but trust me, I had no intention of hurting you and your family," Lee said to Alice. "My grandpa sent me an allowance every month, but my mother was an addict. She would spend all the money on drugs with her boyfriend. We sometimes didn't have anything to eat because of her careless spending habits. And after her death, her boyfriend kicked me out and I had nowhere to go. I needed a lot of money to rent a room and attend college. I contacted Grandpa, and he sent me the money to go into a hotel for a short time," Lee told Alice, who was listening to her intently. "When Dad learned about my profession 3 months ago, he asked me to stop," Lee continued. "But I was so angry at him that I didn't listen to him. Instead, I continued doing what I did, just to make him mad." Alice truly felt sorry for Lee. "But one day, Dad came to my apartment and asked for my forgiveness. He told me he'll take care of me and fulfill all his duties towards me." Lee smiled and looked at Alice. "He told me so much about you and Alexandra, and how you were an excellent mom to Alexandra. I'd be lying if I said I didn't envy Alexandra for having amazing parents." Alice smiled and said, "Lee, your dad is right. You should give up working as an escort. Take admission in college and pursue a career in fashion, which is your dream. Yes, that's the plan. I'm going back to Las Vegas today. That's why I came to apologize to you, Lee said. But why are you going back? Alice sounded concerned. I went to meet Dad yesterday in a hotel, and I was heartbroken to see him upset. He looked restless and terribly missed you. So I decided to go far from you all, so you can continue to live peacefully like before. Lee smiled as she answered. She stood up and went towards the door. Wait! Alice stopped her. Sam was strolling aimlessly in his hotel room. He was waiting for Lee to come so he could drop her at the airport. The door knocked. Sam was surprised to see Alice at the door. She was smiling at Sam, and he immediately hugged her. Alice, I am sorry for hiding the truth from you. Please forgive me, Sam requested. Alice smiled and replied, Sam, I will forgive you on one condition. Sam nodded. I am ready for anything, he replied excitedly. Alice called Lee into the room and said, Sam, I want both of your daughters under the same roof. Sam got misty-eyed and embraced his wife lovingly. I am proud of you, Alice, and Lee will be an excellent daughter to you, he said as he smiled at Lee, who stood in the corner and wept happily.
Susan was a 30-year-old Canadian girl. She met Ryan on an online portal almost 3 months back. He lived in England. He was very lively and funny. Susan found a genuine human connection with him. Though they were not in physical touch, most of their talks were on the internet. They found each other to a great company. Over the next month, they texted each other throughout the day and night. Ryan asked Susan to video chat. In starting, she was slightly worried if it would be okay to do a video call. She was a bit apprehensive because she was married. She wouldn't want to disclose about failed marriage to him, but at last she told him about her broken marriage. She told him that she and her husband were in an open relationship, so she agreed to video chat. Ryan and Susan started video chatting with each other. Day by day, it was getting intense. They wouldn't want to hang up. They would talk for hours because they found each other so tempting, and love was happening between them. Soon, they built up their chemistry as lovers. They both had strong feelings for each other. Now, Susan wouldn't want to be in her heart-aching old relationship. She and her husband decided to split up because she developed feelings for Ryan. She had no feelings for her husband due to their increasing differences, so they both mutually decided to divorce each other. It took some time to get over this feeling of being single again. Ryan asked her to start a new life. He wanted her to fly to England and spend time with him. She decided to meet him. The funny part was that she met him for the first time. All these days, they were in distant relationship from afar through an online portal. Susan had goosebumps just imagining what would happen if she met him. This feeling was driving her crazy. Susan booked her flights, and the 2 weeks leading up to it were a tough time for Ryan and Susan. They were trying to push it away. They both were scared and apprehensive if things would remain the same between them when they met each other, in real or not. They were terrified of meeting each other in person. Finally, the time arrived. Susan reached London. She saw him at the airport waiting for her. He picked her up from the airport and without any delay, kissed her right away. He was not anxious or nervous. Susan was shaking because it was so surreal for her senses. He was all that she wanted ever. He had good physique and a great sense of humor. He was talking non-stop during their travel from the airport to home. His laughter was lively. Susan forgot her 10 years of marriage because what she experienced with this man in 10 days was way more impressive than the 10 years with her husband. She recalled all the differences and chaos between Robert and her. Their parents were familiar friends, so due to built-up pressure from the family, they got married, but there was no charm. Both remained busy with careers, even didn't try to plan a family. She remembered she had wasted 10 golden years of her life with this man, who was least concerned about her. She got pregnant after 2 years of marriage. Due to negligence, she had a miscarriage. Robert was so insane that he didn't even care about her emotional trauma of losing a child. Maybe he was too busy in his endeavors. They both stopped sleeping together. Soon, they started sharing different rooms. They were together only for public appearances. Robert was a cold-hearted businessman who knew nothing about love and emotions. For him, reaching heights and living life practical was a balanced life. He didn't like to compromise on anything. He was a stubborn man with a rock-solid heart, for whom life should be purposeful. He had the vision to be a billionaire, so if his family life goes to zero, he wouldn't care about that. Susan was ultimately the opposite. She was a soft-hearted kindred spirit who wanted to live her life to the fullest. For her, love mattered more than materialistic possessions. Their differences were rising day by day. Ryan was a perfect match for her. He was her soulmate. Everything she always had been hoping to have in life. She didn't have to think about saying or doing anything when she was with him. It was always naturally flowing. He praised her for her fantastic fashion and dress-up sense and encouraged her to pursue her fashion design career. She was all messed up before. Ryan gave her the strength to live the life of her dreams. His zodiac was Capricorn. She saw that Capricorn charm in him. Capricornians are the best partners as teams. He encouraged her and motivated her to see a dream for herself. He showed her how to live life. More than that, he was of utmost care not to hurt her fragile emotions. He made her feel wanted, and that's the best gift a man can give to her woman. He knew her inside and out, and she knew that he was the deserving one for her love. Susan and Robert's divorce was in process. Susan was spending a great time in Ryan's company in England, but one day she got a call from her husband. He said he threw all her stuff outside the home. Finally, she had to go back to London to sort things out. Susan decided to be with Ryan for her whole life, but life isn't easy as we planned. This time, after returning home, when she tried to get in touch with Ryan over the call, he didn't pick up a single call despite her endless calls. She was giving divorce to her husband for a lover who wasn't even picking up her calls. Her online account was not used for a week. His presence was nowhere. She didn't know how to contact him. There was no one else to get to know about him. Now, she became suspicious of him. Perhaps he had had enough of her while she was around, and he wouldn't want to be with her anymore. So he had stopped all sorts of modes through which she could connect with him. Now she accepted it as her destiny. The following 2 months were very hectic and sad for her. It wasn't easy to revitalize her emotions and get back on track. Finally, Robert and Susan parted ways, and Robert agreed to give one of his houses to Susan in alimony. Susan had decided on her life ahead, so now she focused on her career. She opened up a designer store from her savings and got indulged in shaping up her career. It was Ryan who gave wings to her vision. Somehow, she had deep in her veins somewhere that he would never ditch her, but destiny plays a significant role in anyone's life, and we all are just like puppets, so nothing was in her hand. Life was running. Days and nights were passing by. 2 years passed. Once or twice she checked his online account or phone number to know if anything was active, but all dead. She stopped expecting anything good to happen to her, so she thought she should adopt a baby, and that baby would fill the emptiness of her life. She did the needful to adopt a baby girl. It was an Asian child named Maya. Means good luck. She builds a great bond with the child. She took great care of her like her child. One day, Susan got a big fashion event in England. Susan was at heights in her profession. She was all set to fly again to England, where she had memories stored frozen. As and when she reached there, all memories revived. His home was hardly a few kilometers away from her event's place. A dual emotion was running in her mind if she should visit him and get to know if he was there. But another reason was telling her not to go. What if he is with another woman? Or what if he had forgotten her? She wouldn't be able to survive after knowing the harsh truth. But her guiding angels were encouraging her to check him. She needed closure. All these years, the unknown part was killing her slowly. What went wrong with him that he didn't try to connect with her? She wanted a closer. She wanted to know his truth. She wanted to encounter him and ask why he showed her dreams if he could not live those dreams with her. To get her peace of mind, she had to go there. Susan took a cab, left her daughter in the hotel room, and reached his place. Her apartment was on the 11th floor. She was in life, and her heart was pounding at 150 to 200 beats per minute, which were no less than a racing heart. There were ample curiosity and emotions in it. She rang the doorbell. A woman came outside and opened the door. It looked like some house help. She asked about Ryan. The other woman replied he was inside his home in the drawing room. She entered there and found a man in a wheelchair looking outside the balcony. She went toward him. It was him. She didn't care whether he was in a wheelchair. She ran towards him, sat down, and hugged him. Ryan told her that he met with a fatal accident in which his car was crushed and he was bedridden for 6 months. His phone crashed too in that. He didn't have her number to contact too. She asked him if he could come over or send her an email, or if he could come online to tell her all that. He became silent. She asked him again why he did do that. He said that he wouldn't want her to spend time with a man who had lost his one leg amputated from the knee. He said he was scared of rejection. He wouldn't want to face her in his sad condition. That's why he preferred to stay away from her. Now Susan was all into tears. She anguishedly told him that he was being selfish while he did this. They both decided to spend life together in all good, bad, and ugly. So why did he refrain himself away from her when he needed her badly? Ryan was crying too. They both didn't know how much they were in love with each other. Finally, they both were together. Ryan attended Susan's fashion event. He met with her daughter. They mingled well. Susan stayed at Ryan's place for a couple of days. One day, when she asked him to go back, he asked her to open his drawer and told her that he had kept something for her there. Susan opened his drawer. There was a beautiful small box. She opened the box and found a shining diamond ring waiting for her. She had no words to say. Tears were rolling from her eyes. From the other end, Ryan asked her, "Will you marry me?" Alex would never have thought that his life would end up this way. Attending college and getting a dream degree made Alex believe his life would improve, and right after university, he would find a job and settle. That plan, however, did not work out. Alex drove an Uber every day for over 12 hours and was often bored out of his mind. That a squirrel scampering across a road excited him. The job was quite dull, and it barely paid enough for Alex to be able to survive without starving himself to death. The one rule that Alex had no trouble following concerning his job was that he wasn't supposed to interfere with his customers' private lives. He never had the time, patience, or interest to listen to their stories and show any inclination to know more, especially since he had so much going on in his life. The countless jobs he had applied to had come back with a rejection letter, pushing Alex over the brink, questioning his existence and his will to live. He had no hope left to continue scouting for jobs. He accepted that driving an Uber and barely making enough to pay rent and fill his stomach was what his life had come to and would stay that way for his entire life, even though he put in more effort than anyone his age. The only good thing he was looking forward to was his corgi. His corgi, Milo, had been the best thing to happen to him in his entire life. Not that there were a lot of other life events that he could use as a comparison. His family had died in a car accident when he was just 13, resulting in him having to jump from one foster home to another until he was 18 and had enough money to get an apartment. It wasn't an apartment you would find in a magazine. It was a run-down block of old buildings with more walls with moss than he had ever seen in his life. He lived in the apartment for 7 years, not having the financial freedom to shift to another place that would be slightly better than the dumpster. One night, as the rain beat down on the dark streets with dimly lit streetlights that cast an eerie glow, distorting the road, his lonely life flipped. Like any other day, Alex drove through the city picking up customers, trying to portray himself as a happy-go-lucky guy and dropping those people off at destinations he wished were his final home. The entire day had been exhausting. His morning started with a rude customer who thought they had the right to treat Alex like he was below them. Unless he wanted to lose his job, Alex couldn't do much except listen and try to respond as calmly as he could. Alex couldn't wait to go home and sleep on his couch until he had to wake up and continue the tedious process again. However, the last ride of the day changed his plans, not just for the day, but for his life. He had been waiting to pick up the customer and drop them off at their location without indulging in a conversation. He had developed the habit of tapping his index and middle fingers on the steering wheel as a distraction. All that changed when a girl who looked roughly 19 hopped, sobbing, into the car, asking to be dropped off at a house on the other side of town. She kept looking back towards the place she was picked up from. It reminded him of a fearful animal that would glance behind to ensure the predator hadn't followed it. Ensuring he followed the rules of his work, Alex did not intrude despite being aware that something was wrong. It was hard, very hard, to stay silent. His eyes would move to his rearview mirror to see the girl's state. "He hit me again, Lily. I can't do it anymore. I don't know how much longer I can handle all of this." The girl sobbed into her phone. Her hand trembled with fear. Every word she uttered after that had Alex hooked, and he couldn't help but eavesdrop once he had gotten a good look at how she shivered when she spoke. All he wanted to do was give her the warmest hug he could muster and tell her everything would be okay. As he contemplated the best possible course of action, he decided offering water to the girl wouldn't do any harm, so that's exactly what he did. He grabbed a new water bottle on his dashboard and handed it to the girl without saying anything. She mumbled, "Thank you," before quietly sobbing into her phone. Finally, calm enough to form coherent sentences, she started explaining what had happened over the night to the speaker on the other end. Alex couldn't help but listen to the conversation. The girl's name was Hazel, which Alex had picked up from his client's profile. While she spoke in broken sentences to who Alex assumed was a friend, he could briefly gauge what Hazel was going through. Yeah, he hit me this time." "I know, you did warn me. But what am I supposed to do, Lily? He's my father. I can't just abandon him." Yeah, I know. Well, because I didn't finish my chores. I know it's crazy, but my dad was drunk." "Yeah, I will call you once I'm out of this Uber." She seemed shaken up by the events that played out, and Alex saw Hazel take deep breaths, trying to calm herself, and was a little satisfied to know that it was working. Seeing the girl in this state reminded him so much of himself and his experience in foster homes. The dark memories from foster care, or Alex's burning desire to help Hazel, eventually pushed him to break the one rule Uber drivers had to follow. Are you okay? Do you need anything?" he said awkwardly. No, nothing," she stammered. And Alex didn't know if it was fear or the overwhelming amount of emotion she was going through. "I'm sorry, but I couldn't help but overhear your conversation." "I'm okay, just a little shaken up. Life at home isn't the greatest, and it got unbearable tonight. I had to leave," Hazel replied, sighing deeply, and for a moment, no one spoke. Alex wasn't sure if she would continue, and it seemed like Hazel was trying to calm her nerves by drinking the entire bottle of water Alex had given her. After a few moments, Alex decided to break the silence by asking her if she wanted to confide in him, while letting her know he understood what coming from a broken family felt like, and maybe having someone who's gone through similar experiences listen would help. Alex seemed to be weighing the pros and cons of this, her eyes darting from her hands to Alex, until she finally sighed and nodded. "My mom died a year ago in a car accident. She was on her way to pick me up from cheer practice when a truck rammed into her, and she passed away right there. I guess my dad decided to blame me for her death, considering she was coming to pick me up. Honestly, sometimes I think he's not wrong." Alex noticed that Hazel's breath rate started getting quicker. He motioned for her to drink water while telling her to take deep breaths. Hazel continued with her story once she had taken a few deep breaths to regulate her breathing. Over the months, he started getting aggressive towards me and made me clean the house and do chores for him that was never up to his expectations. It seems as if he's turning the grief of my mom dying into anger and directing all of it towards me. With tears running down her face, she told Alex how her dad used to be a nice, gentle guy and never expected him to turn against her. Hazel's knuckles went white as she crushed the empty bottle in her hand when she moved on to how abusive her father had become in the last few months. They continued to converse about how she dealt with all of this until they reached her location. Before getting out of the car, she thanked Alex for listening to her, and at that moment, Alex made a decision that changed his and her life. He asked Hazel for an address where they could send each other letters so that he could make sure she was safe. Exchanging addresses, Hazel got out of the car with a smile, her chest feeling light. It seemed as if both of them developed a sibling-like relationship where Alex felt the need to protect Hazel as if she was his little sister. And Hazel felt comforted by Alex, just like she imagined she would feel if she had an older brother. Unfortunately, she was an only child and had no siblings to support her. They started exchanging letters weekly, with Hazel giving Alex the details about her school life, her cheer competitions, and her life at home. Alex made sure to reply to every single letter, cheering Hazel on and motivating her to keep going, even though the situation at her house worsened over time. It gave both of them a sense of peace to know they had another person they could rely on in times of need. It was almost like an intermission, just a few seconds of light in their lives. But like all good must come to an end, their brief period of happiness was crushed when Hazel's father found out about the letters. "I'm so stupid," Hazel thought when she came home to realize that she hadn't picked up the letters in the mailbox before leaving for school. Now her dad sat on the sofa in front of the door with the letter she had received this morning opened on the table in front of him, along with all the other letters she had kept in her drawer. He sucked in air through gritted teeth, a sign he was furious. His cheeks were flushed red from the multiple drinks he had had. "What is all of this, Hazel? Who is this man you're talking to?" All she could do was fall to her knees, apologizing and crying for forgiveness. She knew her dad was more furious that she had told someone else about his actions, and now he would never let her send another letter again. When her dad returned to his room, Hazel picked herself up from the floor, went to her room, and started packing her bag. She sent what she believed to be her last letter to Alex. "Alex, this isn't an ordinary letter. My dad found out about the letters we have been exchanging, and now I will never be able to send another one again. This will be the last one. Please look after yourself and don't worry about me. I'll be fine. I'll figure out how to survive. I always do. Please don't reply to this, Alex. I'll get in trouble. Thank you for always being there for me. I'll never forget you. H." As she scribbled the last line, tears splotched the previous line, and all she could think of was if Alex would be able to read the letter. Days go by with no communication between the two. Hazel continued with her life the same as before she met Alex, even though there was a void in her life that she couldn't fill. However, Alex couldn't think straight since he got Hazel's letter telling him not to contact her again. He did not know if she was safe and didn't feel comfortable letting her stay there without any knowledge of her well-being. Alex was driving home when he abruptly made a sharp U-turn and went opposite. His mind filled with determination, he decided to stop by Hazel's house and see how she was doing for himself. He tried to remain patient and forget about her, but those few weeks were the best weeks of his life, and all he wanted was to get that back. Fortunately for Hazel and Alex, Hazel's dad wasn't home when she opened the door to Alex standing on her doorstep. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her eyes wide with shock. "I had to see if you were okay. I was worried," Alex replied, shaking and ruffling his hair. Hazel invited Alex inside since her dad was going to be out late and explained every detail of what had happened the day her dad found the letters. "It got bad. I don't think I can go through it again. That's why I decided to stop sending any letters. I'm sorry for making you worried." Alex felt a sense of anger wash over him as he realized what Hazel, someone he considered his younger sister, was going through while living here. "You must leave, Hazel. It's not safe for you to stay here." He convinced Hazel to leave the house, going to the spare house that she went to when they first met. It took a while to get the point across, but Alex understood how scary the situation might be for her and gave her time to decide while he prepared tea for her. "Okay." A voice echoed through the house and reached him. Hazel had agreed to escape this broken home. Alex helped her pack her bags while she wrote a note for her dad, explaining that she could no longer live here and needed to leave to keep herself sane. Settling in the passenger seat of his car, Alex managed to drop Hazel off at her new house. She got off with the promise that she would continue writing, letting him know she was okay. That night, as Hazel lay in bed without her father looming over her, threatening her with death, she felt at ease, knowing that someone loved her. Alex lay on his couch, and for the first time in so many years, he slept with the happiness that someone was out there who cared for him. Even if his life hadn't gotten better financially, there was someone who was emotionally there for him. Grandma Agnes loved to look out the window at an old tree that grew nearby. The older woman mentally talked about her problems to her and shared her pain and memories of the past years. It seemed to her that the tree heard her stories and even answered, quietly shaking its thin branches. Grandma Agnes ended up in a nursing home recently when her youngest son had an accident at work and was injured. Her son became disabled and moved in a wheelchair. Her daughter-in-law refused to look after her, referring to the fact that she already had enough work. Agnes did not complain. The nursing home suited her needs, and the food was average. It was just dull. There was no one to talk to. The residents were mostly bedridden patients. They did not have time to talk to her. Yes, and everyone had the same goal, to get rid of this hard life as soon as possible. When you lie bedridden, you are spoon-fed, and strangers serve the table. There is no time for talking. Agnes was more fortunate than others. She could walk by herself and often went to the hospital park. In the garden, Agnes approached her beloved birch tree and quietly whispered to her about her problems. The tree, in response, poured fine snow on her, as if it was sheltering her from all problems. Relatives often came to other residents, brought homemade food, and took them out for walking. And there was no one coming to Agnes. Her younger son could barely move in a wheelchair, and the eldest one had long lived with his family abroad, and there were no letters from him. Life in the nursing home flowed monotonously and quietly. Some died and were taken to cemetery. Other older adults came to their place to live out their last days here, homesick in silence and loneliness. But one day, everything changed. There was a noise at night. Everyone was running along the corridors, shouting, stomping. Agnes could not understand anything when she heard the long-forgotten word, war. She remembered the war. She was 4 years old, and her family lived in the countryside. Her father was taken to the war immediately, and her mother, with 2 children and grandma, stayed home. Her mother and grandma decided to leave when the war came very close, and the bombshells began to fly right into the yard. Agnes remembered this hard road for the rest of her life. She had to walk for a long time and then travel by train for several days. There were many strange and angry people around, and little Agnes was always afraid and crying. Her mother would calm the girl, but her fear would not go away. During the evacuation, the family settled in a distant village with some other elderly people. They ate what they had to. They wanted to eat constantly. And when all this horror was over, they had to travel by train for a long time and then get to their house on foot. Only their house was no longer there, and the village was gone. Everything was burned down. Her mother made the only right decision and moved with the children to a small town. Agnes lived there all her life, married, gave birth to 2 sons, and buried her husband in a small cemetery. And now the war had come again. The nurses were shouting that everyone needed to be evacuated urgently. Buses arrived in the morning. All the bedridden patients were loaded on stretchers and taken away. And those who could move independently were told to pack their things and wait for the next bus. The older adults waited long in the lobby for someone to come for them. But that was in vain. No one else arrived for them. Continuous explosions were heard in the distance. The elderly went to their rooms and began to calm down a little when the continuous sirens were heard again and everyone was sent to the shelter. That was the place of a large and dirty basement under the building. The sirens were not to be heard from there, but the place was freezing and damp. It smelled of mice and cat urine. Most of all, older adults were afraid of the unknown. It was unclear who was bombing, why the rockets were flying around, and what was happening at all. Soon a nurse came down to the basement and brought warm blankets, water, and food. She answered questions unequivocally, saying that she did not know anything, and that battles were going on somewhere nearby, and explosions and shootings were heard. Thus passed the first night of the war. Many older adults prayed in the basement and asked God for mercy and protection. One of the women became sick. The nurse brought her medicine. The explosions were already audible to everyone, meaning the front was approaching. Agnes and other older adults had to sit in that damp basement for 2 weeks. Of the entire service staff, only a few nurses and a watchman remained with them. They helped the elderly in any way they could. At nights, the watchman would go to the food warehouse, which was located nearby, and bring food. They got a kerosene stove from somewhere, and they cooked simple food on it. The water in the basement dripped from the water pipe. It helped to survive, but it was freezing and damp. The days dragged on for a long time. The uncertainty weighed heavily, and explosions and the roar of shots were still heard above. Many older adults had coughing and choking attacks from dampness. There were no medicines. They poured hot water into plastic bottles and hid them under their clothes. They could warm up a bit that way. Young nurses brought their children to the basement where the older adults hid, so they would not be left alone at home. So they all lived together. Grandmas told fairy tales to children, and children played their games. Time passed, but help did not come. After another trip for groceries, the watchman did not return back. The nurses said that a shell fragment had hit him. Now the nurses began to go for groceries, but they said there was very little food left, and soon everything should end. Agnes could not understand who attacked a quiet, peaceful city, which has always been famous for its hospitality, and from the whispers of the nurses, Agnes realized that the war was arranged by a neighboring friendly country, which was considered fraternal. Her amazement knew no bounds. Something was wrong with them. This country could not act that way. It cannot be. They messed up something there. But everything turned out to be the bitter truth. The neighboring state where her relatives lived, where she and her mother were once evacuated and hiding from the enemy invaders, is now bombing her hometown, smashing everything around and pouring fire on peaceful houses. What the heck was happening to this world? Agnes began to pray to God and ask him her questions quietly. She did not pray for herself, but her heart ached for her sons. One lived in a suburban village and was utterly helpless in his wheelchair. The other disappeared abroad, and Agnes knew nothing about him. Another week had passed. Finally, the basement doors opened, and the nurses said everything was over and they could go out. When Agnes went out into the street, the bright sunlight blinded her eyes. She had to cover them with her hand. Being accustomed to the light, Agnes turned to her favorite tree and could not see it. Instead of a large, beautiful tree, there was a giant funnel. The nursing home building survived, only there were practically no windows. But the neighboring houses were all destroyed. Tanks with incomprehensible signs were moving along the street. Agnes had never seen such a sign. Agnes decided that she was too old to understand anything. Maybe someone threatened them, but she didn't know anything about it. It was no longer necessary. Their main issue was to finally see the sun and go to sleep in their beds. There were no glasses left or heating in the building, so the windows were boarded up with sheets of plywood. The bed was dry but cold. A few days later, a bus with a red cross came, and they were told that everyone was being taken to a safe place. Agnes, along with other older adults, took one last look at the nursing home, which was no longer a cozy haven, and went to the bus. They were given hot tea on the bus, fed lunch, and assisted those who needed it. They drove for a long time, the whole night. It was hot on the bus. Agnes finally warmed up after the damp basement and got some sleep. But thoughts of her sons haunted her. How were they? Did they manage to escape? Was there a place for them to live? All these questions faded into the background. Only the pain in her heart for the fate of loved ones did not give her rest. Agnes asked God to help, protect, preserve, and let her see her children, whose life scattered over different countries. Finally, the bus stopped. It was a checkpoint, but the military guys did not check anything with the older adults, and the bus went on. They were being taken somewhere, and no one knew where. Everyone was happy with hot food and a warm bus. At another stop, everyone began to leave the bus with their belongings. Agnes saw a large railway station and a train where older adults were put in front of her. The carriages were reserved seats and were very warm. Agnes managed to settle down on the bottom bunk. She didn't hear anything else. She just fell into a deep sleep. The train traveled for a long time without stopping. The windows were closed with blackouts and artificial lighting lit the car. At a long stop, customs officers came in, checked their documents, and the train moved on. Finally, the older adults were told to get out on the platform after several long travel days. Agnes went outside and sipped the warm spring air with pleasure. All around, there was a riot of young greenery and flowering trees. Agnes did not notice how the warm spring came, only the trees differed slightly from her hometown. Agnes looked at the station building and gasped. The sign was written in an unfamiliar language to her. What's happening? Why were they taken abroad? How could she find her sons now? These questions kept popping up in her head. Agnes and all the refugees were led into the waiting room. Quilted mattresses lay right on the floor. Agnes found a free bed and, exhausted, lay down on it. The journey tired the older woman. Volunteers fed everyone with hot lunch. People were constantly moving around. It was impossible to fall asleep. She lay with her eyes closed on a bare mattress. She covered herself with a thin blanket and warmed up a little. Agnes tried not to think about what would happen next. Worrying thoughts swirled in her head, and there was a strong cough. Agnes felt weak. She was shivering. She was ill. The night passed half asleep. In the morning, all the older adults were again invited to the bus and taken somewhere. They didn't drive long. After 4 hours, everyone was dropped off near a luxurious building. After a short check-in, the older adults were taken to their homes. It was another nursing home for the elderly, but how beautiful it was. Luxurious crystal chandeliers were hanging in the lobby. Underfloor heating pleasantly warmed their senile feet. The staff was polite and attentive. The room was clean and comfortable. There was a TV, but the programs were in a foreign language. The cleaning lady told Agnes they were in another country's nursing home. Agnes was utterly sad. How will she find her sons now? Grandma couldn't think of anything else. She did not want to eat. It became difficult to get out of bed, and a strong cough overcame her. She did not want to go out. Nothing pleased her. Her roommate was also in bed all the time. The arduous journey, which lasted several days in a row, completely took away the strength of the older adults. Grandma Agnes was not pleased with anything, and a strong cough kept overcoming her. The thought that she would have to die in a foreign land and her children may never find her grave was incredibly depressing. She wanted to return back to her home, but there was nothing left except ashes. Agnes often remembered her favorite tree sitting next to the window, with which she liked to talk all the time. Gradually, life began to leave a tired, frail body. The nurse noticed Agnes's poor condition and called the doctor. The doctor examined her and prescribed a treatment. Agnes was spoon-fed, but she didn't feel like eating. Where were her sons now? How were they doing? Especially her soul hurt for the youngest son because he was utterly helpless in his wheelchair. A few more days passed. Agnes began to recover. Her strength returned, but she did not want to live. Grandma was constantly crying and praying to God for her children. If only they were all right. She had no other desires. Her neighbor died one night and quietly left this life while dreaming. Agnes was left alone in the room. The older woman looked sadly out the window. There were many trees in the park, but they were unfamiliar to her. Suddenly, at the end of the alley, Agnes saw her tree. It was a miracle. The tree was similar to the one Agnes had spoken to at home when she lived in the nursing home. Agnes put on a warm blouse and went outside. This tree beckoned her with its shadow. There was a small carved bench under the tree. The sun was shining, light clouds were rushing across the sky, and the weather was terrific. Agnes sat down on a bench and looked around. There were beautiful, well-groomed flower beds. Older adults walked along the alleys, and polite nurses accompanied them. Life went on, but the thoughts of her children never stopped haunting her. She wanted to see at least with one eye on how they were doing, hear their voice, and feel their smell. Yes, at least they would talk about themselves, Agnes thought, continuing to sit on the bench. Day after day, Agnes lived well. Her new roommate was a cheerful lady, always telling something and did not letting her get bored. She said that soon the war would end and everyone would be returned to their country. But Agnes did not want to go back. The conditions were better there and the food was good. The only thing she would like to do was see her children. The older woman thought and sighed heavily. One day, when Agnes, as usual, was sitting on a bench under her favorite tree, she was quietly called out with a long-forgotten word. "Mom!" Agnes froze in surprise, shocked, not believing her luck. From the voice, she recognized that this was her eldest son. But how could that be? Because no one knew that Agnes lived there. Agnes looked around and froze with happiness. Yes, it was her eldest son. Only he had grown up a bit and got better. The older woman rushed to her son and pressed her whole body against him. The mother clung to her son's shirt as if she was afraid that it was a mirage, a figment of her imagination, and it would soon disappear. The son embraced her with firm, strong arms. Tears streamed from both eyes. When the first emotion subsided, Agnes asked how they managed to find her. The son told her about how he learned about the war and the evacuation of the nursing home. Agnes heard a long story about searching through all the lists of refugees. Volunteers helped him find his mother. Having learned about his mother's whereabouts, the son put aside all his tasks and immediately arrived at the nursing home. And when he saw his aged, alive mother sitting alone on the bench, his legs buckled. It turned out that her son lived in France and got married. He had a small business, and his wife and 2 wonderful children lived with him in a big house. Agnes's joy knew no bounds. She had grandchildren. The older woman did not even dare to dream of such happiness. And when her son said that he was taking her from the nursing home to his family, Agnes was embarrassed. She wanted to see her grandchildren, but she was afraid to interfere with her son's family's happiness and embarrass him. In response, the son only laughed, took his mother in his arms, and carried him to his car. The road didn't take long, it was just a few hours. When they arrived, Agnes was pleasantly surprised. In front of her, she saw a huge house that looked like a small medieval castle. A chic garden was laid out on a clean, well-groomed site. There were several fountains and many flowers. The son said his wife, Alona, loved flowers very much and took care of them herself. With trepidation, the older woman entered a large, luxurious house where her son lived. Suddenly, 2 charming kids ran out to meet her. These were her grandchildren. The children cautiously approached Agnes and stared at her with childlike curiosity. Agnes sat quietly on the couch in the hall and gently pulled the children to her. She stroked the children's heads with tears, inhaled the long-forgotten smell of babies, and could not believe in her happiness. "I am your grandma," Agnes whispered. and I found you." The kids immediately felt like a loved one. They hugged her with their little arms and laughed merrily. Their mother, Ilona, followed the children. She quietly watched the meeting of native people and smiled. Then the daughter-in-law went up to her mother-in-law and hugged the older woman. So they stood there, being strangers yesterday, and today they were such dear and beloved people. With a cheerful roar, her son entered and burst out laughing. "Well, the dampness was bread. Come on, hostess, set the table. We want to eat from the road." Ilona began to fuss and immediately took her mother-in-law to her room on the first floor. The room was very comfortable. The bathroom was beautifully tiled, and the windows hung with luxurious curtains. The older woman quietly sat down on the edge of the bed and began to cry again, only this time from happiness. And soon she got another piece of good news. The younger son and his wife also managed to leave the war zone abroad and have already undergone surgery. Soon he could walk and visit her, so the whole family will gather together. Agnes went out into the luxurious garden, sat on a bench, and quietly began her prayer. Only now she thanked God that he answered her prayers, performed a miracle, and allowed her to see her sons. She had something to thank the Creator for. Instead of an unknown grave in a foreign land, Agnes was waiting for a calm, secure old age and the love of loved ones.
Elijah had never even imagined in his wildest dreams that his life would become so ruthless. He had lost one leg, and now his wife, Jasmine, demanded a divorce. Jasmine had been taking care of him for 2 months now. She had become awfully quiet after Elijah's accident. She felt Elijah was a burden on her and could not enjoy her life due to it. Hence, in the morning during breakfast, she said, "Elijah, I cannot do this anymore." Elijah didn't understand at first. "What's the matter, Jasmine? Is everything okay?" he sincerely asked her. Jasmine lost her temper and screamed, "Nothing is all right, okay? It's you who is the problem. Since you have lost your leg and your job, I am running the house and looking after you like a nurse. Elijah, I am sorry, but I think this was it for us." Elijah stared at her wife and felt sorry for her. Jasmine had gotten too busy after his accident. She had to wake up early in the morning, prepare breakfast, give Elijah medicines, run to school, and work there till 5 p.m. When she returned, she had to take care of the dinner and prepare for the next day at school. He truly understood his wife's bad temper. She needed rest. "Jazz, why don't you take a few days off from school so you can rest? I'll make you breakfast and lunch, and for dinner we can cook together. What do you say?" Elijah asked her. Jasmine scowled at him and replied, "Elijah, I think divorce can fix us. I'm sorry, but I don't want to live with a man who cannot even walk properly, and I don't see any chances of improvement for you." Elijah was truly hurt by his wife's harsh words. "Jazz, I have an idea. How about we use our savings and get a prosthetic leg for me? Once I am back on my feet, I can look for jobs and we can save again," Elijah suggested. "No way am I letting you use our savings for your leg. It took us 2 good years to save that money to open our own cafe, and now you just want to waste it to fix your amputated leg?" Jasmine lashed out at him. It was Elijah and Jasmine's dream to open their own cafe in Saint Antonio, France, a small, beautiful town in France that attracts many tourists. They had decided to save their money until they had enough funds to open a cafe. Elijah was excellent at baking different delicacies, while Jasmine was good with management and money. They were hopeful that together they would make an excellent team. However, with Jasmine's demand for divorce, Elijah knew that his dream was over. He looked at Jasmine and realized that she wasn't the same Jasmine who vowed to stay by his side in sickness and health. Hence, he decided to honor Jasmine's request and divorced her. He also allowed her to withdraw 50% of the savings from their savings account. With Jasmine gone, Elijah felt lonely in his apartment. He had lost his job as a chef in a popular restaurant due to his amputation, and now Jasmine was gone. He buried his head, and a tear escaped his eye. "This accident wasn't my fault. Why is everyone leaving me because I have lost my leg?" he asked himself silently. Elijah grabbed his clutches and picked up the coffee cup. He felt pity for himself, and that made him angry. He kept staring at the kitchen that he and Jasmine had set together. The warm sunlight filtered through the chiffon curtain and filled the kitchen with a soft golden glow. He looked at his amputated leg and decided to get back on his feet. Elijah went to the hospital to discuss a prosthetic leg with his doctor. After meeting the doctor and understanding everything about the prosthetic leg, Elijah decided to go to the bank and withdraw his money. He was sure that he had enough funds to cover the expenses. "Once I'm back on my feet, I'll start saving again for my dream cafe," he thought. But soon his hope was shattered into a million pieces when the banker said, "Mr. Elijah, your account has zero balance. Mrs. Elijah withdrew all the funds last month." Elijah felt dizzy. He couldn't imagine that Jasmine had taken all the money with her. He silently walked out of the bank and went home. He tried calling Jasmine on her cell phone, but all in vain. Elijah sat for several hours on the couch, thinking about his helplessness and how he would move forward in life without enough funds for a proper job. And to make things even worse, he was all alone. His wife left him and took away all his money. After several hours, Elijah realized that overthinking would bring him no good. Thus, he decided that he'll go job hunting to start earning again. "I am sure there are plenty of restaurants in Paris that need a chef," he thought to himself. Elijah changed into fresh clothes, picked up his resume, and walked out of the house. He started walking in the streets of Paris to see if anyone needed help. He went to a few bakeries and cafes, but they turned him down because of his disability. The owners were ready to give him some money, but nobody wanted to hire him. Exhausted, he sat down in a cafe and ordered an espresso. He looked at the cafe and admired its interior and furniture. It gave a very cozy and homely vibe to customers. However, Elijah noticed that the cafe was empty, and only 2 customers, including him. When he finished his espresso, he went to the counter for payment. "It's okay, son. It's on the house." A kind man smiled at Elijah. "You don't have to pity me. I have money," Elijah replied politely. "I am sorry. That's not what I meant." The kind man looked embarrassed and replied, "I am actually closing down the cafe. It's not generating any income for me. So I decided to close it today and offer free coffees to everyone." Elijah listened to the man and decided to talk to him more. "Sir, if you don't mind, may I ask why you are shutting this place down?" Elijah asked. "Luca. Please call me Luca. I am shutting down this place because I am old now. My sister and I used to run this place, but after her disease, it has become difficult for me to manage it alone. Plus, my sister used to take care of the chefs and all the baked items." Luca smiled sadly. Elijah's mind started racing. He had an idea to help him and Luca. "Luca, I have an idea. Do you mind if we sit and discuss it over another round of coffee?" Elijah smiled and requested Luca. "Sure. Why not, my child?" Luca responded. They sat at the nearest table, and Luca closed the gate when the last customer walked out. "Luca, my name is Elijah, and I like your place, and I think you shouldn't shut this beautiful cafe," Elijah said. "But child, I am too old to manage it alone. Plus, I don't have that many customers to keep the place running," Luca told Elijah. "I have an idea. How about I manage your place and take care of your baked items? I am an excellent chef, and I have immense experience baking delightful delicacies," Elijah said with a warm smile. He looked at Luca and continued, "Here's my resume that shows I have worked in reputable restaurants in Paris." Luca took Elijah's file and viewed it. He was impressed with Elijah's working experience. "That's impressive, Elijah. I really like your idea, but I cannot pay you the salary that you deserve, my child. I can barely cover up the expenses and pay the staff's salary," Luca replied to Elijah. "I don't want a high salary. See, Luca, it was my dream to run a cafe, but at the moment, I don't have the resources to get started. I need a job so I can start saving for my dream again. I am ready at whatever salary you hire me. Plus, I'll market your cafe and bring in more customers," Elijah explained. Luca thought for a few moments and finally agreed. "Okay, Elijah, you can start working tomorrow." Luca extended his hand. "Why not today? I'm ready to begin working from today." Elijah smiled and shook hands with Luca. Elijah went straight to the kitchen and introduced himself to the staff. Luca informed the staff that Elijah would guide them about more recipes and how to present the delicacies to the customer. Without wasting any other second, Elijah got down to work. He updated the menu, wrote new recipes for the chefs, and instructed them about the proper presentation to make the baked delights look more appetizing. The staff and Luca were impressed with Elijah's dedication and expertise. The next morning, Elijah came early to the cafe. He opened the cafe and brewed himself a nice cup of coffee. A few minutes later, Luca joined him, and Elijah offered him some coffee. "The coffee smells amazing, Elijah. I am sure it will wake up my brain," Luca smiled. Elijah gave him the coffee, and they talked for a few minutes. Elijah suggested to Luca that they should create an online identity for the cafe to bring in more customers. Luca allowed Elijah to give him the complete freedom to run the cafe as he wished. For the next few weeks, Elijah immersed himself in work to forget about the problems of his life. He created the cafe's business page on social media websites. He posted aesthetic pictures of coffees, lattes, brownies, and fresh croissants. Luca noticed that many customers had started coming to his cafe and loved everything from coffees to freshly baked muffins. In the next few months, Elijah had proved himself, and Luca had started making more profit than ever. He had started paying Elijah a handsome salary for all his effort and hard work. Elijah felt happier that Luca trusted him and hired him. He felt settled in his life and started saving for his dream cafe and prosthetic leg. On Elijah's birthday, Luca and the cafe staff celebrated his birthday. Luca gave him a check for his birthday gift. "Elijah, my son, I want you to get a prosthetic leg." He patted Elijah on his shoulders. Elijah had tears in his eyes and was moved by Luca's kindness and generosity. 2 years later, Elijah had become a different person. He was back on his feet and actively managed the cafe and kept promoting the cafe on social media till it became popular across Paris. Luca was planning to establish another branch because of the cafe's growing popularity. On 14th February, Valentine's Day, Elijah posted on social media that the cafe will give free heart-shaped brownies with every order of coffee. He created such many deals and discounts to invite more customers. As always, people started pouring in as soon as the cafe opened. But someone amongst the customers shocked Elijah. It was Jasmine. Jasmine was unrecognizable. She had lost weight and looked poverty-stricken. She looked at Elijah and was surprised to see him in perfect condition. She also noticed that customers met him and complimented him on the fresh and juicy sandwiches. She mustered the courage to go to Elijah. "Hello, Elijah. It's good to see you," she said in a weak voice. Elijah looked at her. "I am doing good, Jasmine, even though you did your best to break me, but here I am standing on my legs," he replied curtly. Jasmine started crying. "I am sorry, Elijah. I really am. I was selfish for leaving you when you needed me the most, and I took all your money even though I knew you needed it for your prosthetic leg." Elijah looked at her. She sniffed her nose and continued. "I took all the money and went to Venice. I met a guy there who tricked me into believing he could help me open a cafe. I was a fool. I handed him all the money and he just vanished. I then realized how you must have felt when I fled with the money." Jasmine rubbed her eyes and looked at Elijah. "What I did to you came back at me. Please forgive me, Elijah. You have a heart of gold," Jasmine pleaded to him. "It's okay, Jasmine. I had forgiven you for the love I once had for you," he said softly. Jasmine smiled and asked, "Is it possible that we get back together? I promise I won't leave you till my last breath." Elijah stayed silent for a few moments and replied to her, "No, Jasmine. I am finally at a place where I am happy and settled in my life. There is no place for you now. If you had stayed with me in my tough times, we would have opened our own cafe just as we always dreamed of. But now, I'll fulfill my dreams alone." Elijah turned around and walked away from Jasmine. He wiped the tears from the corner of his eyes and walked to the kitchen to bake white chocolate cookies for his customers.
Mark Hughes has had a life-defining career as one of the best and top-serving Marines during his time in the department as a United States Marine officer. After returning from what would be his 17th tour with the Marines, he had been diagnosed with a partial brain tumor that had affected both his mental and physical ability. Hughes had been remanded at the Quantico base in South Virginia to be honorably discharged from the Marines. It was a tough pill for him to swallow because he had dedicated almost all his life to a reputable service of defending his beloved country on all fronts. Tears gathered at the corner of his eye as he received his letter from the commanding officer, shook hands, and made his way out of the office. There was loud applause from the comrades as he walked through the hallway and out of the Marine facility. He paused outside, looked back at the institute that built him into the man he now is, and had no regrets. A great man of honor, poise, and completeness. Hughes took a transport home to meet with his family, whom he rarely sees back in Tampa Bay, Florida. The joy was in his daughter's face as she saw her father returning from the tour in his uniforms after a long time. She screamed and jumped on him, calling out to her mother that her father had returned. The screams filled the air as his wife, Angela, grabbed him tightly and kissed him everywhere. It was a thing of joy for everyone. and there were smiles until he broke the news to them. He gave the envelope to his wife, and the smiles dampened, and the daughter joined in to read his discharge letter. The three of them held themselves around his family as they sobbed together. The brain tumor was still in its early stage, and he could only feel mild to no symptoms. It was said to be a pituitary tumor and would develop faster if he was subjected to the same amount of stress and mental fatigue. However, doctors had suggested that he could undergo surgery if he wanted, but the chances that it would be successful weren't guaranteed. This decision he wanted to make with his family. He felt already fulfilled, as he would like to dedicate the rest of his life to the service of other young men who desired to take the same path as him in life. To go out there, wear the badge of honor, defend their country's perimeter, and do it with every pride and blood. Although his wife and daughter would try to deter him from doing this, he insisted that it was the path that would crown all his efforts and give him the kind of fulfillment he felt he deserved. Not knowing how long he had, or how much he could effect during the period that he had left, he thought that he was making the best decision for himself and pleaded with his family to understand that this choice was for him to make and for them to support him, making his last days count for everything. As you would understand, there were a lot of mixed feelings that came with this choice of his. His family would prefer to have him at home and have the best possible time they could with him while they still could. But they also had to understand him in some ways and allow him to have the peace he wanted from within. So Mark Hughes would seek clinical help and therapy to help him gain stability and maintain a healthy mind. This was simple to him going back, so starting the charity he wanted to lend himself unto. Without any doubt, as he returned to Quantico, he was accepted as part of the backroom staff to help the prospecting young officers progress enrollment into the United States Marines. This was, of course, after he had tendered his medical certification showing that he could play this role and had what it took to fit in. As you'd expect, many prospecting young men desired to wear the badge and defend the country, but as with everything that has to do with young adults, there is a big chance that many of them would fall off track. Hughes stood out in his work ethic and how he lent himself for the good of these young adults. Weaving together his experience, expertise, and dedication to the badge into one mold, he made a lot of them redefine themselves and the purpose for which they were in the Marine Academy. There were a few boys in training at the time. His issues weren't just the kind of the ordinary young person. It was aggravated. He didn't need the extra push or motivation. He was opposing the authorities, defying the laws. With his rage and energy, he was a hard one to miss. Hughes took to him more personally and tried to understand why someone with such potential and drive would have such a harsh side that would prevent him from achieving success at the academy. He could see more in him than anyone else. He was convinced he could help Brian find himself and apply his attributes to a better end. So he decided to take on this challenge. Even with his struggles, Hughes decided to have sessions with Brian, talking to him and trying to understand his psyche, the reasons behind his patterns of reactions, his utterances, and his silence. It was a revelation and a study process at the same time. Hughes was a man of firm frames that wouldn't soften his surfaces to accommodate any excesses. That was the kind of discipline that the Academy expected to be impacted these intending Marines. Still, Brian needed to be tuned through other channels. Hughes saw that his potential was too huge and could be a loss to the Academy and country by extension. He was a waste to himself, as Brian never truly understood what he carried. 2 months in this role, it looked like he was scratching the paint priming on the wall. Nothing had changed about Brian, but that couldn't be said about Hughes. The symptoms were becoming more pronounced, with him having seizures and sometimes losing sense of his limbs. Speaking and articulation problems were setting in too, and so was occasional memory loss. It was becoming more and more challenging to pick up after Brian, and the Academy commander had decided to expel him from the Academy. Hughes had to put a word in for Brian and try to buy him another chance. Patience was running out, even from the instructors and personnel. Brian's trials forced Hughes into basic research, and he began to understand specific characteristics exhibited by him. It turned out that Brian didn't have a father figure in his life while growing up. which forced him to make complex, irrational decisions at an early age, and he grew up with it. With this understanding came to refinance a subtler approach to helping Brian. Hughes began to make good progress, which was overwhelmingly great for him as he finally felt he had injected some good into the world after such a long life at the feet of violence and extremism. It was clear to him that he was doing better than he's done all this year. Brian began applying himself extensively to his childhood dream of becoming a Marine. His potentials were now clearly laid for all to see. There wasn't a better second. Brian Walters was the best graduating cadet of the Academy and won the award for the most outstanding performance for an intending officer in the field and arm events. Everyone knew it was hugely born from Hughes' influence on him. Brian couldn't be more thankful and appreciated every bit of contribution Hughes submitted to make him a success at the Academy and took him as the father figure he never had. This success added a lot to Hughes. He understood that he could be better off helping a person like this. That led him to reconsider his decision on the surgery, leading him back home. His family was always on the ferry's toes to receive him whenever he came. They welcomed him and showed him the inside. Now the sickness toll has taken its bites, and his family would agree with him to abide by the surgery, even if his chances weren't favorable. The day came, and he was escorted into the theater by his family, including Brian, who's taken him as his father. Thankfully, the operation was successful, but a few other health complications required him to receive a transfusion. Hughes' daughter, Sophie, was available and willing and was the only donor public. But tests wrote her off as she wasn't in the most delicate state of health to be a donor. Brian volunteers to be tested to see if he'd be a match, and luckily he was. The doctor hurried and progressed in the transfusion. After full recovery, the doctor invited Hughes to his office for a word before being discharged. After conducting the tests for Brian to be a donor, he revealed that he noticed an unbelievable match in their blood components and decided to do a DNA. It turned out positive. Brian is, after all, his son. This came as a big shock to both parties. It was unbelievable. Mark Hughes had to take a long, deep dive into retrospective thinking, and then he could connect the dots. It was one of the few times he was internally deployed to a remote station in Utah. He had a brief relationship with a woman of mixed race. He was withdrawn from the position unexpectedly to a more pressing front. He was involved with her, so it was the only possibility of having Brian. This recollection would tally with Brian's story because his mother was mixed and was married to Mr. Walters, hence his last name. What a way it was to meet his son he never knew existed. So many blessings came from a situation he thought would be his end. The surgery was successful, so he was no longer a tumor sufferer. He was now more exposed to factors of humanity and how he could better lend himself to the formation of better Marines, society, and the world at large. His family was a member larger, and Angela, his wife, and Sophie would welcome Brian into the fold. It's sometimes odd how nature chooses to push us, but if we allow ourselves to enjoy every scent of blossoming petals, we could be colored from our insides. After spending sufficient time with his family, Hughes ultimately returned to Quantico and continued to impact the lives of young, promising individuals who had raving desires to be Marines, and continues to live through his legacy.